The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Zach, are you there?
Good afternoon and welcome to AGB's virtual workshop for board professionals and the session, Transforming Challenges into Opportunities. I'm Rob Waters, Vice President of Experiential Programming and Partnerships, and before we begin, I would like to quickly review some logistical items. We highly encourage audience participation and engagement. If you would like to ask the facilitator a question, please type it in the questions box and click send. AGB staff will be reviewing questions as they come in throughout the presentation, so please pose them as they occur. To maximize your engagement, we will not be disclosing personal or institutional information related to your questions, as members of the media may be present. As a reminder, the session is being recorded and will be made available to all AGB members shortly after the conclusion of the workshop. Additionally, on behalf of AGB and the AGB Board of Directors, I want to thank our corporate partners who have been exceptionally supportive as AGB pivoted from a location-based conference to a virtual event. Much like our members, they are contributing to this virtual conference while also dealing with the COVID-19 crisis themselves and supporting their clients who are dealing with it. Their partnership is vital to our programs, and we benefit from the thought leadership and resources they bring to AGB and you, our members. With that, I'm very pleased to introduce our facilitator, Dr. Carlos Garcia. Dr. Garcia is Chief of Staff and Director of Institutional Relations for CETIS University System, as well as an AGB Senior Consultant. Dr. Garcia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of you still on the West Coast. Greetings from Mexico. Before we get started, I just want to convey my best wishes, hoping that you and your families are doing well and that you are staying healthy and at home as much as possible. Prior to jumping into our first slide, I would just like to recognize AGB for their leadership and the decision that they made to keep the National Conference on Trusteeship and also the workshop for board professionals going. I think this is a great opportunity for our organizations to continue positioning itself, and I'm just glad that they decided to continue in this way. I commend the leadership of Henry Stever, our president, who made this decision. And I think that it's been not only useful, but it's also shed some light on everything that we can do to be flexible and nimble in response, in this case, to the pandemic and the contingency that has been thrusted upon us. So to get started, what I would like to do over the next 25 or 30 minutes or so, it's quickly go through a short deck of slides that we'll use to address three topics. The role of the board professional in fostering appropriate engagement, the role of the board professional in crisis management mode, and how to contribute to prepare our boards for what I'm calling the new normal. What is it that we will be seeing in the years, in the months and the years to come? And we will try to address this from what our good friend Terry McTaggart calls peacetime operations to engagement during a crisis, and hopefully in that way we will address the main topic of our webinar, turning challenges into opportunities. Well, as board professionals, I'm certain that you are all well versed in everything and anything that has to do with governance. We all know that governance is a group responsibility and that the board, as a body, is an entity that is responsible to society. However, we should also acknowledge that it is individuals who comprise these boards, and it's through their individual behavior that proper governance emerges. So, engagement, to start, is something that correlates with effective governance, and board members engage when they feel that their time and their talent is valued. And this is where the board professional comes in. Sorry about that. There we go. So AGD has a number of resources describing appropriate or effective governance. And one that I really like is these three concentric circles that they use to describe that sweet spot that lies at the intersection of having the right composition, the right focus, and the right dynamics. Now, composition, it's about having a diverse board, a board that is diverse not only in gender or ethnicity, but also on the skills and perspectives that are represented on that board, so that the decisions that they arrive to have the benefit of multiple inputs that represent different sectors or ways of thinking. One of the key questions that we often hear is, do we have the board that we need to accomplish our 20 something vision, whether that's 2020, 2025, 2030? Institutions are asking themselves, do we have the board that we need to get us to that place? The second component is focus. And focus has to do with where the energy and the focus of the board at a particular moment. Is it strategic, or are they delving too much into operations? I subscribe to this NIFO concept that President Stever has been communicating to us repeatedly: noses in, fingers out. It used to be hands in, hands out. I've heard a different number of ways to express the, 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 the the division that should occur in where the board spends their time. I like noses in, fingers out, because it reflects a fiduciary responsibility. The board needs to be aware of what's going on the institution, but they have to keep themselves operating on a strategic plane, on a strategic level. So NIFO, noses in, fingers out. And also, the third component would be to have the right dynamics. Is there trust? Is there camaraderie among the board members? Do they have discipline as a group? Is this a board that embraces respectful dissent? Do we have the elements in place to make sure that discussions, well-intended discussions, occur, and that the board develops this culture of inquiry? Now, I would be the first to tell you and admit to you that all of these matters have to do with the board, not with the board professional. Nevertheless, the board professional comes in the fact that we are key because of our position and the centrality of a role. We play a key role in supporting our board to achieve effective governance. So on the column to the right, I have annotated a number of elements in which the board professional may come in. First, supporting the trusteeship committee. Do we have a board inventory of skills and talents? Do we have a projection of how our board is going to behave, how its composition is going to evolve over time once term limits come due to those who are already in place? Do we have an appropriate onboarding and orientation process that communicates to the board what is expected of them and what's not? Now, a number of you may be saying, I would venture the majority of you would be saying, well, that's kind of obvious. But still, we find at some cases, at some universities, institutions and boards that do not have such evolved or robust governance practices. Now, to the second area, to the focus, to helping the board have the right focus: agenda construction. Agenda construction is as much an art as a science. And we all know that it should be the chair of the board who, along with the board members or the governance committee, construct the agenda for a particular session of the board. However, we also know that they often come back to us or to the president, to us as board professionals, or to the president to ask what is it that should be going in the agenda. So, how do we construct that agenda? What is the order in which the items of business appear in the agenda? If we have an important decision to make, is that at a right moment during a meeting where we will have the best possibilities for carrying it forward? Or are we putting something first in the agenda that it's controversial or that has been known to lead to discussions that may end up in heated arguments and therefore create a tense environment or atmosphere that is not conducive for what we are hoping the rest of the board meeting to be. So agenda construction is a key element in where we as board professionals play a major role, in my opinion, of course. Now, supporting materials. We often complain about board members delving into operation and trying to make decisions or place questions or make comments that are more linked to our operational matters. Well, one thing that we must recognize is that we are often inadvertently the cause of this problem. Why? Because the materials that we put in front of them are conducive to micromanagement because we have not given them questions, in-depth questions, or topics where they should be placing their energy. Instead, we're giving them reports and we are feeding them all this information, a bunch of numbers and spreadsheets and whatnot. And obviously, that will go and that will be conducive to the type of involvement that we don't want our board to have and involvement overly involved in micromanagement, in the management of the institution. That's a board, that's a function for the president. Board education and development. Let us make sure that we are putting in front of them materials and opportunities to continue educating themselves and developing as a board. And finally, dynamics. We are key to establishing right, timely, and appropriate communication between the institution and the board of trustees or the board of regents or the board of directors, whatever it is that we use in our nomenclature. So we have to be mindful of the important responsibility that we have in communicating to them. Any board member, any chair would say, I don't like surprises. I don't want to read in the paper about something that's going on at our institution. So we must make sure that we communicate effectively with them because this is conducive to this atmosphere of trust that it's required when we have to merge to move from peacetime operations to engaging in a crisis management mode. Excuse me for a second. So the board, as we all know, it's the board professional, I should say, is uniquely positioned and prepared uh, to foster and promote adequate involvement both in regular times and also during a crisis. And some of the tools at our disposal for doing that is running effective meetings, preparing adequate materials, planning the agenda, and doing the logistics, as I already explained. Board development must continue not only to make sure that we have appropriate trusteeship culture within our institution, but also in this case, in the case of a crisis management mode or scenario, to make sure that our board members have an idea of what the business of higher ed is going to look like in the 12, 18, or 24 months to come, or even down the road. So this atmosphere of trust that we were addressing earlier, it's a conduit for the institution communication, and also it's critical to strengthen the president and chair relationship. Now, as you all know, we are all facing this terrible pandemic. I was at a webinar a couple of days ago. Terry McTaggart was presenting, and he did mention something along the lines of this is a type 3 category situation that we're facing. This is a crisis management uh, requirement that doesn't stem from an emergency. It's not a fiduciary crisis, but it's a universal catastrophe. It's something that's going on all over. And contrary to what has happened at other moments where we have either a natural disaster or an economic meltdown at some place, this thing here is universal. So this is a great opportunity for our trustees to harness the fiduciary dimension of the issue and to understand that the post-COVID landscape is going to be very different to what we used to know. This is a great opportunity for leading, not leading. And this would entail that we must revalue, reshape, reprioritize, and restructure the understanding that we have about how our institutions function. I would posit that if we were to try to bring our institutions back to what we used to know, to the comfort and the serenity of the waters that we used to navigate in the past, if we were trying to do that, we would be advocating on a great responsibility. The world is not going to be as comfortable as we used to know it. This is a new ball game. These are new scenarios. These are new challenges that we are facing, and we need to respond to that. Boards with robust governance practices are stepping back at this moment only to give presidents room to maneuver. This is short term. And I do make the distinction boards with robust governance practices because, in most cases, those institutions that have robust governance systems in place have made the distinction, and there is enough trust and there's enough confidence on the abilities of the president and his or her staff to make sure that board members can step back and let presidents and their teams handle the emergency. But this doesn't mean that the board is just going to wash their hands and move away and be done with their responsibility. No, communication is still required. It is also expected and it's welcome because the board has to be engaged as a thought partner through this process. But if the board is going to be stepping back in the short term to let the institution manage the immediate emergency and provide business continuity, in this case, academic continuity, well, this is as good a time as any for the board members to use this time to educate themselves about how the scenario, how the environment is going to look down the road in the fall or maybe even next year. So it's a good time to start crafting scenarios, to start discussing possibilities of where is it that we're going to be going in the near future. It's time for the boards to start making the type of questions that lead to institutional development and institutional growth. Um, I am more of a visual person, so I just crafted this little chart, this little map, just to try to illustrate how are we going to be arriving to that new normal. I would posit that right now we we have uh, we have to learn about what's going on, the learning that's going to come for our institution and for the industry of higher ed as a whole is something that we need to incorporate in our scenario making exercises and our decision making. We also we are going to also be well served if we make a correct assessment of the opportunities that are part of this crisis. Every crisis comes with a set of opportunities. Another thing that I believe is extremely important is the fact that the expectations, sorry about that, let me just go back quick. the expectations of our stakeholders are going to change. Parents are going to have different expectations. Students are going to have different expectations. Faculty and staff are going to have different expectations. Higher ed is nowadays discussing what's going to happen now that our students have had a taste of working remotely, of studying at home, of not coming to the campus. We all miss life at campus. We all miss the student life. But there is a good number of students who we venture are going to say, I think working from home is good enough for me. So what implication is that going to have to our financial health? What's going to happen with our tuitions? Will be adhering to the same financial models that we have? Are we going to have to start thinking about the possibility of a decline in enrollment because the way that we provide the educational service, it might not be as relevant to some segments of the population anymore? What about our staff? What about our policies for HR, for working at home, for hiring adjuncts, for tenured professors and whatnot? So these are some of the elements that I think that the presidents of the institutions should be studying, but the board, from their own perspective, needs to be addressing. And I believe this is going to help us understand what the implications of this new normal are. And only if we understand these implications, we are going to be able to enter into discussions with an open and flexible attitude about how to imagine the type of support that our institutions are going to have. I believe that's that's what's going to allow some institutions, sadly not all, to achieve institutional growth and sharpen their competitive edge. We know that before this COVID-19 hit, there were already a number of colleges and institutions in dire strait, financial distress. We know. And it might be that some of them will not survive this crisis. However, I believe that this is as good as a moment as ever to question what opportunities could be in store for them as a result of this big reset that is being done because of the COVID-19. So again, a great opportunity to lead. Obviously, we have to manage the emergency, and that's what our presidents have been doing very effectively. But there's also this great opportunity to lead and think about the sustainability of our institution. So, and this is almost to wrap it up. So the role of the board professional, it's supporting our board to stay focused and on target, to be future oriented, to ask the right questions, to understand the new normal, to be changed, adapt, and to make the most of that opportunity to lead. I believe also that strategic plans will have to be amended. We all have a strategic plan. In our case, we have established a subcommittee to address the post-COVID scenarios. We were just about to launch our 2030 plan, but we are holding back because obviously some of the things that we had foreseen are going to have to be rethought, are going to have to be amended, are going to have to change. So we have established a subcommittee to address these scenarios, and we brought in what we call out-of-the-box thinkers. We have sought out emerging leaders, both within the board and also within the institution, making sure there's a nice cross sample of the institution, and that we develop an attitude towards welcoming external input. Now is a good time to ask people in other industries how is it that they are addressing the challenges of the COVID-19 and what are they foreseeing for the years to come. So, in closing, and I think we're right on time. In closing, the role of the board professional is critical to helping presidents and chair assess, understand, navigate, decide, and I would say bulletproof the many decisions that they will need to make in the months and years to come. Effective boards, we know there's a lot of research supporting this. Effective boards are strategic thinkers, and we as board professionals can go a long way in fostering and supporting that environment of producing strategic thinkers or helping or boards think strategically in the future. So I will close it. I think that's my last slide, and we are right on time to open a question and answer session. I trust that you find this useful and that it will help you uh, continue doing the great job that you all do in supporting your boards to in turn support your president to advance the mission of the institution. So, Rob, Zach, I'm turning it back to you. Thank you very much.
Carlos, thank you. And thank you for the excellent presentation. I'll kick off with a question um, from your perspective, because you are at a large, excellent, diverse international university system. How are things going at your system and in Mexico, and from your perspective, where you sit?
Oh, well, thank you. It's I would have to make a distinction. It's the higher education system. It's quite heterogeneous in Mexico and also in Latin America. So we have seen most of the accredited institutions, such as ourselves, many of the very serious, uh, quality led, quality oriented institutions move um, towards non presential learning or distance learning in a very effective manner. This has also been the case with some of the public universities. Sadly, not all of them. I would have to say that in Latin America, there's a number of diploma mills, for-profit, low-quality institutions, and obviously those are struggling to move from in campus learning to online or remote learning. They have not prepared for this, and they're obviously having a hard time doing so. So I would start my answer with that distinction. Other than that, I would say that we have, I believe, institutions in Latin America are making a very good use of their network, of their peers. There's been a lot of openness among presidents to discuss what is it that it's being done at their universities, to understand what considerations others are addressing that you might be overlooking. So we have been doing a lot of benchmark, and we have been monitoring what other institutions are doing, and that has been very helpful. Obviously, you have to take that all in and process it through a filter that responds to the specific needs of your own institution and your own possibilities. But students are doing fine. I think that we are maybe a month or 3 weeks behind the curve of what other countries, such as the US, are facing with the COVID-19. So if you ask me again in maybe a month's time, maybe our answer will change a little. I think everybody now understands that we will be finishing this semester online. The students are not going to be coming back to the campus, but the discussions are already there uh, around the possibility of a fall semester without students on campus. So that's still something that we're discussing.
Thank you. I have a question. As a board professional who aspires to be influential and constructive to good leadership, especially now, but as someone who has not consistently been seen by my president and shares a thought partner, how can I step up in this environment?
Well, I think that uh, presidents are swamped even in normal time, uh, least to say when managing a crisis such as this one. So I believe it now more than ever they would they value, they require, and they embrace the fact that they have a board professional to help them uh, deal with some aspects of the board institution relationship. So I would say just continue with the type of communication that always have to be there, very open communication, being that conduit between the president and the chair, making sure that you bring to the chair whatever you think it's relevant, having obviously previously vetted that with your own president, having clarity of the agenda, and just be there for your board, helping them uh, make the right engage in the right conversations and engage in the right discussions, and also come back to whatever feedback that you're getting from your board, whether it's the chair or the chair of the governance committee or a committee that you staff, if not the board as a whole, and then bring that back to the president and make it, try to act as an interface that provides each side with some sort of understanding of the context or the lens under which they are engaging in conversations. So I think our role is more relevant than ever. I think you could all be a great asset to your president and to the cabinet when you go back and forth and act as a conduit, trying to advance the agenda of the institution, not the agenda of the board, but the agenda of the institution.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a sort of follow-up question. I'm going to paraphrase, if not directly quote Maya Angelou. In times of crisis like this, we don't change, we just become more who we are. So let's say if a board president, if a board chair and a president, or a president and his or her board didn't have a particularly good relationship in the first place, or weren't particularly effective working together in the first place, are there ways in which our board professionals can help maybe lift things up a bit, for lack of a better word?
Well, that's an easy one. That's a tough one, and I think there was a slide back there that talked about trust, about the trust that you develop during peacetime operations, doing your normal work, and that allows you to come into an emergency or a contingency such as this uh, with the benefit of having that bedrock of trust that will give some sort of uh, security to the conversations that you have to engage with, because the last thing that a president needs at this point is having to having to watch what she or he says so that it will not be misconstrued by the board because of some previous grievances that they've been just carrying with them over the years. So if you already have that atmosphere of trust, that's great, and you build on that. If you don't have it, well, this might be the moment to have a very open, candid, adult conversations in which you say, you know what, let's put our differences aside for the time being. We have an emergency on our hands. We have to provide academic continuity to our students, and we need all the support from our board. It's not the president who needs the support, it's the institution, and it's the students, and it's the staff, and it's the faculty members, and try to sell that case. I know that this might sound like wishful thinking, especially to those institutions who have endured situations in which they have had this tension between chairs and presidents for a number of years. However, it's the only advice that would come to my mind. We would all hope that there's some sense of maturity that will allow us to set our eyes on the bigger picture and put our petty differences aside.
Oh, great answer. Thank you. How frequently should the board be meeting during this crisis period?
Okay, good. That's a great question. It's, I think, frequently, but I wouldn't venture to say number of days or X or some meetings a month or a quarter, because it depends on a couple of things. First, the size of your board, the composition of our board, and the matureness or how robust their governance practices are. Let us all remember that boards have an executive committee. Now, our executive committee, our own executive committee at my institution, that hadn't had the need to meet for a number of months. Now they're meeting every 2 weeks. They're meeting with the president. But my role in staffing the president, in staffing the board, and staffing the executive committee is to make sure that those meetings are productive. And yes, at the first meeting, we had to present reports as to what is it that we have done over the last couple of weeks. But we are quickly shifting towards what conversations do we need to have in the future. Because if we only present a report of what we do, we invite our board members to just focus on that, to question what we did I mean, they have a right to question, but I mean, we don't want them just spending the better part of their time discussing something that's already being done. We want them engaging themselves and making the best use of their time, their talent, and their energy in addressing the questions that we are all facing with this COVID. So every 2 weeks for the executive committee during this crisis might be good. Maybe every month and a half for the board would be appropriate. It depends when was your last board meeting. How robust is your risk management assessment or your risk management plan? So there's a number of considerations to just process to be able to answer that question. But just rule of thumb, do not get your board together if you don't have something important, if they don't have something important to discuss. Don't fall into the trap of we need to get the board together. Yes, what for? What discussions they're going to have? What's on the agenda? What is the governance committee? And thinking about the agenda, how are the conversations between the president and the chair going? Is this something that should be addressed in executive committee? Does the executive committee have the full support and weight of the board? Ideally, it should have, so that they could just be the ones tasked with walking with the president through this crisis. So there's a number of considerations there. Just don't get the board together if there's not something important for them to discuss.
Thanks, and somewhat related, how would you recommend the board determine which matters on the agenda should be put on hold or during this crisis response?
That's a great question, and I believe that in the last month and a half, I have read I don't know as many articles as I did read the last year. I mean, the Chronicle of Higher Ed, Inside Higher Ed, everybody is just putting out articles that are addressing and identifying things that we need to do to address this pandemic and this post-COVID. Both articles in general, but also in higher education. So I would make sure that we put the right information in front of our board about what institutions are considering and what advice we're getting from other boards and other institutions about the tough conversations and the tough decisions that lay ahead of us down the road. And I believe it's also I believe this is important because we also face this phenomena that there's a saying in Mexico, and I don't know if it translates well into English, but we say, nobody is a prophet in their own land. So if you tell something to your board, yeah, they might listen to you. But if you bring an advisor or a consultant or somebody from abroad to come and tell you the same things, they will likely give her or him more attention than whatever your president or yourself as a board professional are conveying to them. So it's useful to be able to cherry pick some of the articles or the research or the studies that we would like to put in front of them because they reflect the optics of higher education. We all know we're going to have to make significant reductions to our budgets. Okay, is it going to be across the board? Is it going to be with an axe or is it going to be with a scalpel? I would posit it should be surgical. It should be strategic. But if you have had the opportunity for a board member to read about this beforehand, it's easier for your president to make the case that we should be very careful about what cuts we're going to make. This, as I said before, this is also a time for opportunity. So there might need to be some investments that we need to make sure occur. Investments, for example, as obvious as strengthening our IT infrastructure. This might be something that has been just lagging or left in the past. Well, nowadays it's clearer than ever that we should be strengthening the backbone of our IT infrastructure. So when we talked to our board about the changes or the measures that we are going to have to take, let's make sure that we have the benefit of them having developed an appropriate context for us to do so. And also, the key driver, in my opinion, the key driver for any institutional decision about making cuts to the budget should be your mission. Everything has to be run through the filter of your mission. What is it that you, as an institution, are there to do? What is it? What are the characteristics of the type of education that you provide? And let's make sure that we don't eat away at the core when we make the tough decisions that we're going to have to make. Because there are some tough conversations. We're talking about hiring freezes. We are talking about furloughs. We're talking about contracts being rescinded. This is going to impact us, and everything is going to trickle down in such a way that we're going to see our financial statements being impacted. Fundraising is going to go down, at least in the short term. Research shows it always picks up after a crisis, but it might go down. Some other sources of revenue might go down. So let's be very smart about how we address the tough conversations that we need to have.
Oh, thank you. You mentioned that SETI's established a subcommittee to address the post-COVID scenarios. Is that in line with you? Would you speak a little more about that? Is that in line with what you were just saying?
Yes, yes. We quickly realized that discussing or that coming together as a group uh, was something that we needed to do, but the better part of our time would be focused towards managing the emergency, getting the students home, getting the staff to start working from their homes, just providing academic continuity. That in itself takes uh, the time and energy out of any committee that we have. So we decided to we came to the realization that we needed to have somebody who was thinking strictly about the new normal that's coming down the tracks. So that's why we established that committee. And that's why the composition of that committee is out of the box thinkers emerging leaders within the institution. So it's people that don't necessarily hold a specific leadership position. It's even faculty members that have been handpicked to be part of this committee because we don't want the usual suspects trying to decide how the new university is going to look like in the years to come because we all carry our baggage because we all have this context of our own limitations. So if we bring in the usual folks, the head of the VP of enrollment, the VP of instruction, the VP of mission compliance, the provost, if we bring on the same folks, and I'm trying to be very respectful here of their knowledge and experience. If we bring them in, they're going to carry the same baggage with them, and that's going to limit the potential of the innovation and openness of thought that we are looking from them. Now, obviously, at some point, whatever recommendation emerges from this group of out-of-the-box thinker has to be processed through the right filters, and we're going to have to bring in the VP of finance. We're going to have to bring in the VP of advancement. We're going to have to run this through everybody else. But at least we will have had the benefit of a richer, broader, hopefully broader pool of ideas that are not constrained with our artificial delimitations of what is it that we can do or what is it that we shouldn't do. Just I would invite everybody to reflect on the following. If we were having, if we were all having this conversation, I don't know, 2 months ago, February, and somebody would have come up to you and say, well, we're analyzing this scenario where we are going to move all of our instruction online and students are going to go home and faculty members are going to teach from their living rooms and whatnot. If we would have said that, people would have thought we were crazy. They wouldn't have given any credit to this idea, and most folks would say that cannot be done. It's impossible. We don't have the infrastructure. Our faculty are not trained to do that. Our students will not stand for it. We would immediately have discarded this idea. Now, we were not given any option. We were told you have to go home. You have to teach from home. Students, you cannot come to the campus. And here we are, and we're making it work. And we are doing things that would have been completely unthought of some months ago. So with that, under that same line of thought, let us now, that's my invitation, let us now think about what is it that we can do in 12 months, in 16 months, in 18 months, how our universities could look like down the road. But let's do that without the constraints that we all carry because of our own experiences and because of the specific responsibilities that we have at an institution that we need to protect. So let's just have open thinkers toy around with these ideas.
Great, and specifically, how do board professionals? How do you see them fitting into this perspective, which I think is an important perspective? As institutions adjust to the new normal, do you see there being new expectations, responsibilities, ways of thinking for board professionals that might arise?
Yes, I think that, again, thus far, we have been doing a very tactical job, supporting our president, being that conduit with the board. Like I said, robust boards have taken a step back to allow their presidents to tend to the emergency. But now, as we prepare to the next stage, as we wrap up the semester and start thinking about the months to come, this is where I see our work being even more relevant, making sure that we put in front of our board members the inputs and the information that they need to trigger the type of conversations that we need to trigger. So I think at this point we have just most of our time has been devoted to the urgency of the moment. But I think that the best work that we're going to be doing is in the months to come.
And thanks. And part of this, as you said, is challenging, having board professionals be challenged, as you said, to ask the right questions. What do you think are some of the right questions?
Well, some of the right questions are uh, they revolve around this new normal. Is can we it's can we manage the institution in the way that we've been used to managing? Like, for example, the metrics and goals and objectives are something that typically presidents report to the board. We should engage in a conversation about that. Otherwise, we are just going to lead ourselves towards frustration. It will be unfathomable for us to think that an institution is going to be able to meet their budget or their budgetary projections by this end. Uh, Revenue incomes, fundraising, and whatnot. And board members are very much, because of their nature, they're very much oriented to um, to metrics and numbers. So we should be having a conversation about that, because if we don't give this conversation the appropriate context, and we force ourselves to try to meet the budgetary projections that we have, we are going to be making decisions that may not be uh, in the best interest of the institution. We need to make sure that we protect the core mission of an institution, and just take in the fact that this is going to be a year that's not going to go as planned, not for us at our institutions, not for board members at their own corporations, at their own businesses. So that's a reality that we are going to face. Um, Board members should be reviewing their risk management processes, plans, or policies. I don't, regardless of how well crafted your risk management projections are, I think this COVID-19 took us all by surprise. So, how do we prepare ourselves for the next one, whether it's a pandemic or some other type of thing? How do we prepare ourselves? What are the lessons that we have learned from the last 5, 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, depending, it would vary depending on your geography, on where you are. What are the students going to look like? What are our hiring practices are going to look like? I think these are the type of open conversations that the board should be starting to address from a strategic perspective, to be able to provide sustainability to the institution, financial sustainability to the institution. What about endowments? Are we going to tap into our endowments? Are we going to uh, get increase the percentage that we draw from the endowment every year? I have heard some board members say that's untouchable, but it's funny because whenever we hear somebody making the case about an endowment, they always say, well, an endowment is something that you have for a rainy day. Well, guess what? It's pouring. It's raining. It's pouring out there. So this is as much a rainy day as ever. So what are our policies about drawing from the environment going to look like in the next months, or to make not ends meet but semesters meet, or be able to finalize this business year, this annual tax cycle. So uh, that's what comes to my mind. I would just add that I think this is part of the job that we need to do, is identify what are the type of questions that we need to be asking ourselves. We might not even have clarity about the type of questions that we will be facing in the future.
Final question, a little dismal. I apologize, but it's been a discussion throughout this workshop and at the national conference last week. Do you see more mergers, affiliations, and even outright closures on the horizon?
Sadly, so I do see closures. Again, like I said, we've all read about a number of colleges and universities being in financial distress before COVID-19. So if they were barely just keeping their heads above water, I think it's pretty obvious what might be ahead for some of those colleges. Again, sadly, some small liberal arts colleges that have been struggling, some regional universities, whatnot. Uh, I think mergers are going to be an option, sure, certainly. So I think we're going to be seeing, I think we're going to be seeing some of that as an alternative to closure. But whenever you do a merger, it's important to keep in mind that one of the drivers to a successful merger is being able to complement your strengths or to level out your weaknesses as an institution. So I think smart mergers might make for a good opportunity. So institutions, in my opinion, shouldn't just be going out to merge with whoever they think that would be in the same type of need that they are. It should be very well thought out, very strategic. Culture plays a key role, and higher education institutions are mission driven, and all of our missions have some specific elements of differentiation, some nuances that make us very unique. So that's going to be something to address when potentially discussing the possibility of who to partner with or who to merge. But that's not a topic of my expertise, so I wouldn't want to lead anybody in the wrong direction with a conversation about this. That's as far as I could go.
No, I appreciate your thoughtful answer and thoughtful answers to all the questions and your presentation in general. So thank you so much for this presentation, and thank you to our audience for participating in today's session. We hope you found the information shared valuable and insightful. To continue the conversation on this topic as well as others, we encourage all board professionals to check out Ning, a social networking platform for the board professional community. I'd like to remind you that a recording of this session will be made available to all AGB members after the workshop concludes. You'll receive further information about how to access session recordings within the coming days. We do ask that you complete a brief survey that will pop up after you leave this session. We welcome any feedback that you may have as we strive to best serve our members through these uncharted times. Once again, thank you, and thank you, Dr. Garcia, and we hope you enjoy the remainder of the virtual workshop for board professionals.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience, and keep safe.